Listen, Trump. I just watched your Republicans attack Mamdani for helping immigrants who built your entire city. And from their hatred rises proof that America belongs to workers, not your family's acquired wealth. You believed immigrants would stay silent, accept your insults, fear your deportations while your ancestors arrived on boats exactly like theirs. You were completely wrong. I saw your lies and I calculated who actually built New York. American hypocrisy is naked. Just see what we will do with you. The Republicans just showed Africa exactly why we rejected Western systems completely. Let me explain how watching their attacks on you confirmed every decision we made to leave their control. I was reading news reports when I saw Republican politicians screaming about your housing policies in New York. They called you a socialist. They said you were harming America. They claimed helping poor people was communism. They attacked you for building affordable homes while their billionaire donors own 50 empty mansions each. The math revealed their evil immediately. New York has 92,000 homeless people sleeping on streets. The city has 77,000 empty luxury apartments owned by billionaires as investments. That means enough empty homes exist to house every homeless person with rooms left over. Republicans defend this arrangement while attacking you for suggesting we use empty apartments to shelter freezing families. I calculated the cruelty systematically. Each luxury apartment cost average $4 million. 77,000 apartments times 4 million equals $308 billion in empty housing. Meanwhile, homeless families die from cold every winter because Republicans claim we cannot afford shelters. They say $308 billion in empty mansions is fine, but spending money to save freezing children is socialism. This is identical mathematics to French colonialism in Africa. France extracted $2.7 trillion from our labor over 60 years. They claimed we were too poor to build schools or hospitals. They insisted we needed their loans and their guidance. Meanwhile, they were stealing enough money to build 10,000 hospitals and 50,000 schools. They created our poverty while blaming us for being poor. Republicans used the exact same trick. They let billionaires hoard $308 billion in empty apartments. Then they claim America is too poor to house homeless families. They create the poverty through wealth hoarding, then blame poor people for being homeless. The system is designed to steal from workers and give to rich people while pretending this is natural and good. I watched Republican Senator Harrison from Texas attack you on television. He said your policies would harm property values. He claimed landlords needed freedom to charge whatever rent they wanted. He insisted that government interference in housing markets was tyranny. He defended billionaires' right to own empty mansions while workers lived in cars. I investigated Senator Harrison's finances immediately. He owns 9 rental properties in Austin worth total $14 million. He collects $73,000 monthly in rent from working families. That's $876,000 yearly. Over his 20 years in Senate, he's collected $17,520,000 from renters while voting against every affordable housing bill. Senator Harrison gets rich by extracting money from workers who need shelter to survive. Then he attacks you for suggesting this extraction is wrong. He defends a system that lets him collect millions while families go homeless. This is not democracy or freedom. This is legalized theft protected by politicians who benefit from the stealing. The Republican attacks on you prove they defend exploitation consciously and deliberately. They are not confused about economics. They are not mistaken about housing policy. They understand exactly how the system works. They profit from worker exploitation personally. They attack anyone who threatens their theft. I calculated how much wealth Republicans in Congress extract from workers through property ownership. The average Republican senator owns property worth $8 million. There are 49 Republican senators. That's $392 million in property they use to extract rent from workers. They collect estimated $19,600,000 yearly in combined rental income. These are the people attacking you for helping homeless families. They personally profit from housing scarcity. They benefit when rents stay high. They get richer when workers stay desperate. Your affordable housing policies threaten their personal wealth extraction. That is why they attack you so viciously. This is exactly why we left Western systems completely. The entire structure is designed to let rich people steal from workers legally. Politicians who benefit from the theft write laws protecting the theft. Media owned by billionaires defends the theft. Police funded by property owners enforce the theft. The whole system exists to transfer wealth from workers to owners while calling this freedom. Republicans claim their system is democratic and free, but workers cannot afford housing in the richest country in human history. Families sleep in cars while luxury apartments sit empty. Children go hungry while billionaires buy fourth vacation homes. This is not freedom. This is organized cruelty designed to concentrate wealth. I recognize this same pattern in French colonialism. France claimed they brought civilization and development to Africa. Meanwhile, they were extracting $45 billion yearly through controlled currency systems. They created our poverty through systematic theft, then blamed us for being underdeveloped. They defended exploitation by claiming it was helping us. Republicans use identical propaganda. They claim capitalism creates prosperity and opportunity. Meanwhile, 40 million Americans live in poverty despite working full-time jobs. They extract wealth from workers through rent, through healthcare costs, through student loans, through every basic need. They create poverty through systematic extraction, then blame poor people for not working hard enough. The mathematical proof is overwhelming. American workers' wages stayed flat for 40 years while productivity doubled. Workers created twice as much value but received the same pay. Where did the extra wealth go? It went to billionaires and property owners. It went to people like Senator Harrison who own rental properties. It went to the rich people who fund Republican campaigns. From 1975 to 2025, American worker productivity increased 112%. If wages had matched productivity, the average worker would earn $92,000 yearly instead of $43,000. The difference, $49,000 per worker per year, was stolen by owners and landlords and billionaires. There are 133 million workers in America. Multiply by $49,000 stolen yearly. That equals $6,517 billion transferred from workers to rich people every single year. Over 50 years, that's $325,850 billion in stolen wages. This theft is larger than French colonial extraction from all of Africa. Republicans defend this system while attacking you for suggesting workers deserve fair pay and affordable housing. They protect the greatest wealth theft in human history while calling you a radical socialist. I understood immediately why they fear you so intensely. You are not just proposing policy changes, you are threatening the entire extraction system that makes them rich. Your affordable housing policies would reduce their rental income, your worker protections would cut their profits, your tax proposals would force them to return stolen wealth. They attack you because you threaten their ability to steal legally. Every policy you propose reduces exploitation they benefit from personally. They defend the current system because they profit from worker suffering. Their opposition is not philosophical or economic. It is purely selfish protection of their wealth extraction. This is why we built completely different systems in Burkina Faso. We recognize that reforming exploitation systems is impossible because the people with power benefit from exploitation. Asking them to reform is asking them to make themselves less rich. They will never agree voluntarily. We needed total system replacement, not gradual reform. We exited the CFA franc entirely instead of negotiating better terms. We expelled French military completely instead of requesting modified agreements. We nationalized exploitative industries instead of regulating them gently. We understood that exploitation systems must be changed, not improved. Your situation in New York is identical. You cannot reform American capitalism into fairness because the people with power profit from unfairness. Republican politicians own rental properties. Democratic politicians receive donations from real estate developers. Both parties benefit from housing scarcity and high rents. They will never voluntarily create affordable housing because doing so reduces their personal wealth. You need revolutionary change, not incremental reform. You need to nationalize empty luxury apartments and house homeless families immediately. You need to seize property from landlords who leave homes empty while people freeze. You need to arrest politicians who defend billionaire hoarding while children go hungry. You need to change the exploitation system completely. I implemented exactly this approach in Burkina Faso. When French corporations refused to pay fair wages, I nationalized their operations. When French banks charged exploitative interest rates, I created our own national bank. When French military created managed terrorism, I expelled them and built community defense. I did not negotiate or compromise. I changed exploitation systems and built new ones. The results proved revolutionary change works better than gradual reform. Our economy grew faster after nationalizing French industries. Our security improved after expelling French military. Our development accelerated after exiting French monetary control. Changing exploitation delivered better results than reforming it. You can achieve identical results in New York. Nationalize the 77,000 empty luxury apartments, house all 92,000 homeless people immediately. Seize rental properties from politicians who vote against affordable housing. Arrest real estate developers who bribe officials. Change the housing exploitation system completely. Republicans will scream about property rights and freedom. They screamed the same things when we nationalized French industries. They predicted economic failure. They guaranteed chaos. They insisted we needed their systems to survive. Every prediction was wrong. We succeeded specifically because we ignored their threats and changed their exploitation. The Republican attacks on you prove they fear your success. If your policies work in New York, workers across America will demand the same changes. If you house homeless people successfully, other cities will copy your model. If you prove that helping workers creates prosperity, their entire exploitation system gets exposed as unnecessary cruelty. Your success will inspire revolutionary change across America. Workers nationwide will demand affordable housing. Populations everywhere will reject billionaire hoarding. Americans generally will recognize capitalism as designed exploitation. The contagion will spread exactly as African sovereignty spread. Republicans fear this transformation desperately. Their attacks on you are attempts to prevent revolutionary change from succeeding. They must make you fail because your success destroys their entire system. They need workers to believe exploitation is inevitable because their wealth depends on continued theft. I am the architect of French colonial system destruction in Africa. I calculated their exploitation. I documented their theft. I revealed their mechanisms. I implemented alternatives. I demonstrated sovereignty. I triggered contagion. I destroyed their legitimacy. You can become the architect of American capitalism's destruction, calculate the exploitation, document the theft, reveal the mechanisms, implement alternatives. Demonstrate that helping workers creates prosperity. Trigger contagion across America. Destroy billionaire legitimacy. The Republican attacks on you prove the system is vulnerable. They fear your success because it threatens their wealth extraction. They attack you desperately because you identified the correct targets. They oppose you intensely because you are winning. This is why we left their system, Mamdani. Western capitalism is designed exploitation with propaganda. American democracy protects billionaire theft from workers. Republican opposition to helping homeless families proves the system is deliberately cruel. Their attacks on you confirm everything we understood about Western systems. We escaped their control completely. We built different systems that serve workers instead of exploiting them. We achieved prosperity specifically because we destroyed exploitation instead of reforming it. We proved revolutionary change works better than gradual reform. You can achieve identical results in New York by applying the same fundamental principles that liberated African nations from French neo-colonial control. The circumstances differ superficially. You face domestic capitalist exploitation rather than foreign colonial extraction. You operate within a supposedly democratic system rather than against explicit imperial domination. You work in the world's financial capital rather than in formerly colonized territories. But the underlying dynamics are identical because exploitation follows the same mathematical patterns, regardless of geographic location or political context. Wealth concentrates through systematic extraction from workers. Power maintains itself through control of economic and political institutions. Change requires confronting these systems directly rather than accepting their legitimacy and working within their constraints. Destroy the housing exploitation system that transfers billions from working families to real estate speculators, landlords, and financial institutions. This isn't about reforming rent control or improving tenant protections within the existing framework. Those measures help at the margins but preserve the fundamental relationship where housing is a commodity for profit rather than a human right. Destruction means eliminating private profit from housing entirely through massive expansion of social housing, conversion of rental properties to cooperative ownership, implementation of land value taxation that captures speculative gains for public benefit, and establishment of community land trusts that remove property from market dynamics permanently. The housing exploitation system cannot coexist with worker prosperity because it's designed specifically to extract wealth from those who need shelter and transfer it to those who own property. The destruction must be comprehensive because partial measures allow the system to adapt and reconstitute itself. If you merely regulate rents, landlords find ways to evict tenants and raise prices through loopholes. If you only build some social housing, the private market continues dominating and setting prices. If you just strengthen tenant protections, property owners shift to other forms of exploitation. Complete destruction means eliminating the profit motive from housing entirely, ensuring that everyone has secure shelter as a right rather than a commodity, and redirecting the billions currently extracted by landlords toward productive investment in communities. Build worker power permanently through institutional structures that cannot be dismantled by future political changes or employer opposition. This means going far beyond traditional union organizing, as important as that remains. Permanent worker power requires workers owning their enterprises through cooperative conversion of existing businesses and creation of new worker-owned firms. It requires workers controlling capital through public banks that prioritize job creation and worker ownership over shareholder returns. It requires workers directing investment through participatory budgeting and democratic planning that replaces market allocation. It requires workers governing workplaces through mandatory representation on corporate boards and ultimately through complete worker control. The permanence comes from creating economic institutions that workers own and control directly, rather than depending on political protections that can be reversed or legal rights that can be eroded. When workers own their enterprises, they cannot be fired or exploited by owners because they are the owners. When workers control capital through public banks, they cannot be starved of investment by private financiers. When workers direct public resources through participatory budgeting, they cannot be ignored by elected officials who depend on their participation. These institutional structures create durable worker power that persists, regardless of which politicians hold office or what policies they implement. Ignore Republican threats completely because responding to them wastes energy and legitimizes their framing of issues. Republicans will threaten to cut federal funding if you implement socialist policies. They will promise to investigate you for corruption or abuse of power. They will warn that businesses will flee and the economy will collapse. They will claim you are destroying prosperity and hurting the very workers you claim to help. Every single one of these threats is either empty or counterproductive to their own interests or both. Federal funding they threaten to cut often comes with conditions that constrain your ability to implement transformative policies anyway. Investigations they promise to launch will find nothing because you are actually helping workers rather than enriching yourself. Businesses that flee are usually exploitative operations you want to replace with worker cooperatives anyway. Economic collapse they predict never materializes because worker prosperity creates genuine economic growth. Ignoring these threats doesn't mean being unprepared for opposition, but rather refusing to let Republican framing dictate your strategy or limit your ambitions. They want you to moderate your policies to avoid their attacks. They want you to move slowly to minimize their opposition. They want you to compromise on transformative change to maintain some bipartisan support. All of this is designed to preserve the capitalist system by preventing the revolutionary change that would actually threaten it. Ignoring their threats means implementing the policies that workers need regardless of Republican opposition, trusting that success will prove your approach correct and build popular support that makes their attacks ineffective. Implement revolutionary change immediately rather than gradually phasing in reforms over years or decades. The temptation toward incrementalism is strong because it seems more politically feasible, less economically disruptive, and easier to defend against attacks. But incrementalism preserves the exploitation system by giving it time to adapt, by allowing capitalists to develop countermeasures, by maintaining the legitimacy of market mechanisms, and by exhausting popular enthusiasm through delayed results. Revolutionary change implemented immediately creates facts on the ground that cannot be easily reversed, demonstrates results quickly enough to build popular support, disrupts capitalist power before it can organize effective resistance, and proves that alternatives to capitalism actually work. Immediate implementation means passing comprehensive legislation quickly, executing it decisively, and accepting the disruption as necessary for transformation. Yes, converting thousands of rental properties to cooperative ownership will create administrative challenges. Yes, establishing participatory budgeting will require learning new processes. Yes, creating worker-owned enterprises will demand new skills and systems, but these challenges are temporary and manageable, while the benefits are permanent and transformative. Delay only allows opposition to organize, doubts to grow, and momentum to dissipate. Your success will prove that helping workers creates prosperity in ways that capitalist exploitation never can. This is the crucial demonstration effect that will transform American politics and economics. For generations, Americans have been told that prosperity requires protecting business interests, that helping workers is charity that economies cannot afford, that redistribution reduces growth, that regulation kills jobs, that socialism produces poverty. Your success in New York will destroy these lies through empirical evidence that no amount of propaganda can overcome. When workers in cooperative enterprises earn more than they did as employees, while their businesses grow faster than capitalist competitors, that proves worker ownership works better. When neighborhoods with participatory budgeting see more investment and better services than those under traditional governance, that proves democratic planning works better. When social housing provides better quality and lower costs than private rental markets, that proves public ownership works better. When progressive taxation funds universal services while the economy grows faster than under low-tax regimes, that proves redistribution works better. The proof won't be theoretical arguments but observable results that people can see and experience directly. Your example will inspire change nationwide as workers in other cities and states demand the same policies that are succeeding in New York. This is how the transformation spreads, not through convincing political elites or winning national elections first, but through demonstrating success locally that creates irresistible pressure for replication elsewhere. Workers in Chicago will ask why they don't have social housing like New York. Workers in Los Angeles will demand participatory budgeting like New York implemented. Workers in Philadelphia will organize to convert their workplaces to cooperatives like New York workers did. The example becomes a template that movements everywhere can point to as proof that their demands are achievable and their vision is realistic. The inspiration won't be limited to progressive cities or democratic states. Workers in conservative areas suffer the same exploitation and will recognize the same solutions once they see them working. The political labels matter less than the material reality of better wages, secure housing, accessible healthcare, and democratic control over their lives. Republican workers who oppose socialism in the abstract will support specific socialist policies that improve their conditions. The example of New York's success will crack the ideological barriers that have kept working-class Americans divided and supporting policies against their own interests. Your policies will destroy American capitalism's legitimacy by proving that the system is neither necessary nor beneficial for prosperity. Capitalism maintains its dominance not primarily through force, but through the belief that there is no alternative, that market mechanisms are the only way to organize complex economies, that private ownership is essential for efficiency and innovation, that profit motives drive all productive activity. These beliefs persist despite causing immense suffering because people see no working alternative. Your success in New York will provide that alternative and destroy capitalism's ideological hegemony. When people see that worker-owned cooperatives innovate more than capitalist corporations, that democratic planning allocates resources more efficiently than markets, that public ownership provides better services than private companies, that solidarity produces more prosperity than competition, they will question everything they've been taught about capitalism's superiority. The legitimacy crisis will be profound because it will be based not on theoretical critique but on practical demonstration. You cannot maintain belief in capitalism's necessity when socialism is producing better results in the world's financial capital. The lesson is eternal because it's based on fundamental truths about human nature and social organization rather than temporary circumstances or cultural specifics. Exploitation systems cannot be reformed because exploiters control the reform process and use it to preserve their power while making minimal concessions. This isn't cynicism but observation of consistent historical patterns. Every attempt to reform capitalism from within has been co-opted, limited, or reversed because those who benefit from exploitation control the institutions that would implement reform. They staff the regulatory agencies with their allies. They fund the politicians who write the legislation. They own the media that shapes public opinion. They control the courts that interpret the laws. Reform that threatens their fundamental interests never gets implemented, and reform that does get implemented never threatens their fundamental interests. The control exploiters exercise over reform isn't absolute or conspiratorial, but structural and systematic. Individual capitalists may support some reforms or even advocate for progressive policies, but the system as a whole resists changes that would genuinely redistribute power and wealth. This resistance operates through countless mechanisms: lobbying that weakens legislation, legal challenges that delay implementation, capital flight that creates economic pressure, media campaigns that turn public opinion, academic research that questions effectiveness, think tanks that propose alternatives, political contributions that elect opponents. The cumulative effect is that reform either fails or succeeds only in ways that preserve the fundamental exploitation system. Revolutionary change is necessary because gradual reform preserves theft by maintaining the basic structures through which wealth is extracted from workers. Gradual reform might increase minimum wages but preserves wage labor itself. It might strengthen tenant protections but maintains landlord ownership of housing. It might regulate working conditions but preserves employer control of workplaces. It might tax wealth but allows continued accumulation. All of this leaves the fundamental exploitation. Intact workers still create value that owners capture. Tenants still pay rent to landlords. Employees still follow orders from bosses. Wealth still concentrates in fewer hands. The theft continues, just with slightly better terms for those being robbed. Revolutionary change is necessary not because reform is undesirable, but because it's insufficient. The goal isn't to make exploitation more tolerable, but to eliminate it entirely. This requires destroying the institutions through which exploitation occurs rather than regulating them. It requires transferring ownership and control to workers rather than protecting workers from owners. It requires replacing market allocation with democratic planning rather than correcting market failures. It requires building entirely new economic structures rather than modifying existing ones. Worker prosperity requires destroying billionaire wealth extraction completely because the two cannot coexist in the same economy. This is mathematical necessity, not ideological preference. Billionaires accumulate wealth by extracting value that workers create. Every $1 billion in billionaire wealth represents value that was produced by workers but captured by owners through property rights, market power, and political influence. You cannot have both worker prosperity and billionaire wealth accumulation because they are opposite sides of the same relationship. Either workers receive the full value of their labor or owners extract a portion as profit. Either wealth is distributed based on productive contribution or it concentrates based on ownership. Either economic power is democratized or it remains concentrated. Destroying billionaire wealth extraction doesn't mean punishing successful entrepreneurs or preventing innovation. It means eliminating the mechanisms through which individuals can accumulate billions by owning rather than working. It means ensuring that those who create value through their labor receive that value rather than having it extracted by shareholders. It means replacing the ownership of productive assets by individuals with collective ownership by workers and communities. It means structuring the economy so that prosperity is widely shared rather than narrowly concentrated. I destroyed French colonialism in Africa through the same fundamental approach you must take in New York, exposing the exploitation mathematically, building viable alternatives practically, implementing change decisively, and proving through results that independence works better than subordination. The destruction wasn't accomplished through military victory or violent revolution, but through systematic revelation of the theft, demonstration that alternatives succeed, and creation of irreversible facts through bold action. French colonialism collapsed when Africans understood precisely how much was being stolen, saw that sovereignty delivered better results, and built institutions that made independence permanent. The mathematical exposure was crucial because it transformed vague resentment into precise understanding. Africans knew they were being exploited but couldn't quantify it exactly until I calculated the specific amounts being extracted through each mechanism. The CFA franc transferred this many billions annually. French corporations extracted resources worth this much below market prices. Military occupation cost this much while serving French rather than African interests. The mathematical precision made denial impossible and created undeniable justification for demanding independence. The practical alternatives were essential because they proved sovereignty was viable rather than catastrophic. France had always claimed that African nations needed French monetary management, military protection, and economic ties to survive. I destroyed these claims by implementing successful alternatives that delivered better results. Nations that exited the CFA franc experienced faster growth. Countries that expelled French military bases achieved greater security. Governments that built independent trade relationships increased prosperity. The practical success made continued subordination indefensible. The decisive implementation created irreversible changes before opposition could organize effectively. If I had moved gradually or sought consensus, French interests would have had time to develop countermeasures, build coalitions, and prevent transformation. Instead, I implemented changes quickly and comprehensively, creating new realities that were difficult to reverse. Once nations had exited the CFA franc and established their own currencies, returning to French monetary control became politically impossible. Once military bases were closed and troops expelled, allowing their return became unthinkable. The decisiveness made the changes permanent. You can transform American capitalism in New York using the same approach. Expose the exploitation mathematically by calculating exactly how much wealth is extracted from workers through wage theft, rent extraction, profit accumulation, and financial manipulation. Document precisely how much workers produce versus how much they receive, how much tenants pay versus the actual cost of housing, how much profit corporations extract versus what they invest in workers and communities, how much wealth concentrates at the top versus what trickles down. Make the theft undeniable through numbers that people can verify themselves. Build viable alternatives practically by implementing policies that prove socialism works better than capitalism. Create worker cooperatives that demonstrate democratic ownership produces better results than hierarchical corporations. Establish social housing that shows public provision delivers better quality at lower cost than private rental markets. Implement participatory budgeting that proves democratic planning allocates resources more effectively than market mechanisms. Provide universal services that demonstrate solidarity produces better outcomes than competition. The practical success will make capitalism indefensible. Implement changes decisively by passing comprehensive legislation quickly and executing it thoroughly before opposition can organize effectively. Don't phase in worker ownership. Convert enterprises to cooperatives rapidly and comprehensively. Don't pilot participatory budgeting in a few neighborhoods. Implement it citywide immediately. Don't experiment with limited social housing. Build massively and quickly. Don't test universal services on small populations. Provide them to everyone at once. The decisiveness will create irreversible transformations that become politically untouchable once people experience their benefits. The mathematics guarantee this outcome because exploitation follows predictable patterns that revolutionary change addresses reliably. When you eliminate rent extraction, housing becomes affordable because you've removed the profit motive that drives prices up. When you implement worker ownership, wages increase because you've eliminated the profit that was being extracted. When you provide universal services, quality of life improves because you've replaced profit-driven provision with need-based allocation. When you democratize economic decision-making, outcomes serve worker interests because workers are making the decisions. These aren't hopeful predictions but mathematical certainties based on changing the equations that determine resource allocation. The strategy is proven through successful implementation in multiple contexts. I proved it works in Africa by ending French colonialism. Other movements have proven it works through successful revolutions, transformative reforms, and local experiments that demonstrated socialist principles. The strategy succeeds because it addresses the root causes of exploitation rather than symptoms, because it builds popular support through material improvements, because it creates institutional structures that resist reversal, and because it proves through results that alternatives work better than the status quo. The path is clear because the strategy has been documented, the obstacles have been identified, and the solutions have been tested. You know what needs to be changed: the housing exploitation system, the wage labor system, the private ownership of productive assets, the market allocation of resources, the concentration of wealth and power. You know what needs to be built: worker cooperatives, social housing, participatory budgeting, universal services, democratic planning. You know how to implement it quickly, comprehensively, decisively, and with confidence that success will prove the approach correct. Republican attacks confirm you are succeeding because they only mobilize against threats to their power and interests. If your policies were ineffective or easily co-opted, Republicans would ignore them or even support them as proof that progressive governance fails. Their attacks demonstrate that you are actually threatening the capitalist system they defend, that you are building genuine worker power rather than symbolic reforms, that you are succeeding in ways that could inspire replication elsewhere. The intensity of their opposition correlates directly with the effectiveness of your policies. Their fear proves you threaten real power rather than merely redistributing some wealth within the existing system. Republicans aren't afraid of modest tax increases or limited social programs because those don't threaten capitalist fundamentals. They are afraid of worker ownership because it eliminates the owner class. They are afraid of participatory budgeting because it democratizes resource allocation. They are afraid of social housing because it removes housing from market dynamics. They are afraid of universal services because they demonstrate that solidarity works better than competition. Their fear is rational because you are threatening to change the system that maintains their power and privilege. Their desperation demonstrates you are winning because powerful interests only become desperate when they are losing control. If Republicans felt confident they could stop your policies or reverse them later, they would respond calmly and strategically. Instead, they attack frantically, make extreme claims, threaten drastic retaliation, and reveal their own concern. The desperation shows that they recognize your success is creating irreversible changes, building popular support they cannot overcome, and inspiring movements they cannot contain. Their desperation is your confirmation that the transformation is working. Continue fighting with confidence that comes from understanding the mathematics, trusting the strategy, and recognizing the signs of success. The fight will intensify as you threaten more fundamental interests, as your success inspires more replication, as the transformation approaches the point of no return. Capitalist interests will deploy every weapon they have: economic pressure, legal challenges, media attacks, political opposition, even resistance if they become desperate enough. But these attacks confirm you are winning and should strengthen rather than weaken your resolve. The victory is certain because the mathematics guarantee it, the strategy has been proven, and the momentum is building. You cannot maintain capitalism once workers understand the exploitation and experience viable alternatives. You cannot preserve billionaire wealth once people recognize it comes from worker theft. You cannot defend market allocation once democratic planning produces better results. You cannot sustain private ownership once cooperative ownership demonstrates superiority. The certainty comes not from faith, but from mathematical and empirical proof that exploitation systems end when confronted with revolutionary alternatives that work better. The transformation is inevitable because it's based on fundamental contradictions within capitalism that cannot be resolved through reform. Capitalism requires exploitation to generate profit, but exploitation generates resistance that threatens the system. Capitalism requires concentration of wealth for capital accumulation, but concentration creates inequality that becomes politically unstable. Capitalism requires market allocation for efficiency claims, but markets produce crises that demand intervention. Capitalism requires private ownership for legitimacy, but ownership concentrates power that democracy cannot tolerate. These contradictions intensify over time and eventually force revolutionary transformation. The future belongs to workers, not exploiters, because workers create all value while exploiters merely extract it. This is mathematical truth, not political rhetoric. Everything of value in the economy is produced by people who work, who grow food, build structures, manufacture goods, provide services, create knowledge, care for others. Owners contribute nothing to production, but extract wealth through property rights that allow them to claim value workers created. A system where those who create value control it is sustainable and just. A system where those who create nothing control everything is neither sustainable nor just, and must eventually be replaced. This is why we left their system rather than trying to reform it from within or accommodate ourselves to its constraints. We recognized that the colonial system could not be reformed because those who benefited from it controlled the reform process. We understood that gradual change would be co-opted or reversed. We knew that requesting permission to be free was absurd. We decided to simply leave, to build our own systems, to prove through success that we didn't need them. This is why we built alternatives rather than merely criticizing the existing system or demanding modifications to it. Criticism is necessary but insufficient. Demands can be ignored or co-opted. Only by building functioning alternatives that demonstrate superiority can you prove that change is possible and desirable. We built our own currencies to replace the CFA franc. We built our own security forces to replace French military occupation. We built our own trade relationships to replace French economic dominance. We built our own development programs to replace French aid agencies. The alternatives proved we could succeed independently. This is why we succeeded where others failed, because we were willing to break completely with the colonial system rather than seeking accommodation within it, because we built comprehensive alternatives rather than piecemeal reforms, because we implemented changes decisively rather than gradually, because we trusted our own capabilities rather than depending on former colonizers. The success came from revolutionary transformation rather than evolutionary reform, from building new systems rather than modifying old ones, from trusting workers rather than depending on elites. This is why you will win in New York and inspire transformation across America, because you are applying the same fundamental principles that ended French colonialism in Africa, principles that have proven effective across different contexts, geographies, and historical moments. The principles transcend specific circumstances because they address universal dynamics of exploitation and liberation. Whether confronting colonial extraction in Africa or capitalist exploitation in America, whether fighting foreign domination or domestic oppression, whether organizing in formerly colonized territories or in the heart of global capitalism, the same fundamental approach succeeds because exploitation follows predictable patterns and revolutionary change addresses those patterns reliably. You are exposing exploitation mathematically in ways that make denial impossible and resistance inevitable. The mathematical exposure transforms abstract grievances into concrete understanding, vague resentment into precise knowledge, emotional frustration into rational analysis. When workers can calculate exactly how much value they create versus how much they receive in wages, when tenants can compute precisely how much they pay in rent versus the actual cost of providing housing, when communities can measure accurately how much wealth is extracted from their neighborhoods versus how much is invested, the exploitation becomes undeniable. Numbers don't lie. Mathematics doesn't deceive. Calculations reveal truth that propaganda cannot obscure. The mathematical approach is powerful because it bypasses ideological debates and appeals directly to people's material interests and rational understanding. You don't need to convince workers that capitalism is philosophically wrong or morally unjust. You simply show them the numbers proving they are being robbed. You don't need to argue that landlords are exploitative. You calculate how much profit they extract from basic human needs. You don't need to claim that billionaires shouldn't exist. You demonstrate mathematically that their wealth comes from value workers created. The evidence speaks for itself and creates its own momentum for change. Building alternatives practically proves that socialism works better than capitalism through observable results rather than theoretical arguments. This practical demonstration is essential because decades of propaganda have convinced many Americans that socialism inevitably fails, that markets are the only efficient allocation mechanism, that private ownership is necessary for innovation and prosperity, that collective action produces mediocrity and stagnation. These beliefs persist not because they are true, but because people have rarely seen working alternatives that prove them false. Your practical success in New York will challenge these myths through empirical evidence that no amount of propaganda can overcome. When worker cooperatives in New York consistently outperform traditional corporations in productivity, innovation, and worker satisfaction, that proves democratic ownership works better than hierarchical control. When social housing provides better quality at lower cost than private rental markets, that proves public provision works better than profit-driven development. When participatory budgeting allocates resources more effectively than representative democracy or market mechanisms, that proves democratic planning works better than elite decision-making or price signals. When universal services deliver better outcomes than means-tested programs or private provision, that proves solidarity works better than competition. Each practical success builds the case for transformation and inspires replication elsewhere. Implementing changes decisively creates irreversible transformations before opposition can organize effective resistance or before doubts can undermine momentum. Decisiveness is crucial because gradual implementation gives capitalist interests time to develop countermeasures, build coalitions against change, create economic pressure through capital flight or investment strikes, mobilize media campaigns to turn public opinion, fund political opposition, and design legal challenges to delay or block transformation. Decisive implementation creates facts on the ground that become politically impossible to reverse once people experience their benefits and organize to defend them. The decisiveness also demonstrates confidence and competence that builds popular support and challenges opposition. When you implement comprehensive change quickly and effectively, you show that you know what you're doing, that you have a clear vision and the capability to execute it, that you are not tentative or uncertain about the transformation you're pursuing. This confidence is contagious, and inspiring workers gain courage from seeing bold action. Communities gain hope from witnessing rapid change. Movements gain energy from observing decisive leadership. Meanwhile, Opposition becomes concerned by the speed and effectiveness of transformation, by their inability to stop changes that are implemented faster than they can respond, by the growing popular support for policies that are succeeding visibly. You are trusting workers rather than accommodating capitalists, recognizing that these are fundamentally incompatible orientations that require choosing sides in a conflict where neutrality is impossible and compromise preserves exploitation. Accommodating capitalists means accepting their framing of issues as questions of economic efficiency, market dynamics, and business viability, rather than questions of justice, democracy, and human dignity. It means treating their perspective as legitimate and worthy of consideration, even when that perspective defends theft and exploitation. It means beginning every policy discussion by asking whether capitalists will accept it, rather than whether workers need it. It means allowing capitalist interests to set the boundaries of acceptable debate and possible action. Accommodating capitalists means respecting their property rights as sacred and inviolable, even when those rights enable systematic exploitation and wealth extraction. It means treating the ownership of productive assets by individuals as natural and necessary, rather than as a historical arrangement that serves specific class interests. It means accepting that because someone owns a building or a business or shares in a corporation, they have rights that supersede the needs of workers who actually create value through their labor. It means preserving the legal and institutional frameworks that protect capitalist ownership while leaving workers vulnerable to exploitation. Accommodating capitalists means considering their interests as equally important as worker interests, even though capitalist interests are fundamentally opposed to worker well-being. It means treating the demand for profit as equivalent to the need for housing, the desire for shareholder returns as comparable to the requirement for living wages, the preference for low taxes as balanced against the necessity of public services. It means creating false equivalencies between the interests of those who extract wealth and those who create it, between those who own and those who work, between those who command and those who obey. Accommodating capitalists means seeking their approval for policies that affect workers, giving them veto power over changes that would reduce their wealth and power. It means consulting business leaders about labor regulations, asking landlords about housing policy, inviting corporate executives to shape economic planning, allowing financial institutions to determine investment priorities. It means treating capitalist approval as necessary for legitimacy, even when implementing policies that serve worker interests. It means moderating your demands to maintain capitalist cooperation, watering down transformative proposals to avoid capitalist opposition, accepting incremental changes that preserve fundamental exploitation rather than pursuing revolutionary transformation that eliminates it. Accommodating capitalists means ultimately preserving the system that empowers them because every accommodation reinforces capitalist legitimacy. See, every consultation validates their authority, every moderation accepts their power, every compromise maintains their position. The cumulative effect of accommodation is that capitalism persists with minor modifications rather than being replaced by systems that serve workers. The exploitation continues with slightly better terms rather than being eliminated entirely. The fundamental relationship between those who own and those who work remains intact rather than being transformed through worker ownership and democratic control. Trusting workers means believing in their capabilities to manage enterprises, make economic decisions, govern communities, and build new systems without capitalist direction or approval. It means recognizing that workers possess the knowledge, skills, intelligence, and commitment necessary to organize production, allocate resources, coordinate activity, and create prosperity. It means understanding that workers don't need owners to tell them what to do, or managers to supervise their labor, or experts to design their systems. It means having confidence that workers can run cooperatives successfully, implement participatory budgeting effectively, manage public services efficiently, and plan economic development democratically. Trusting workers means respecting their knowledge gained through direct experience of production, service delivery, and community life, rather than privileging the abstract theories of economists or the strategic calculations of business executives. It means valuing the understanding that workers have of their own needs, conditions, and possibilities, rather than accepting external definitions of their interests. It means listening to workers about how to organize their workplaces rather than imposing management structures designed to maximize owner profit. It means learning from workers about what their communities need, rather than assuming experts know better. Trusting workers means prioritizing their needs above all other considerations, because workers are the vast majority of the population, because they create all value in the economy, because their well-being determines social health, and because serving them is the purpose of economic and political systems. It means making decisions based on what improves worker lives rather than what maintains business profitability. It means allocating resources according to worker needs rather than market signals. It means structuring institutions to serve worker interests rather than protect capitalist property. Trusting workers means building their power through creating institutions they own and control rather than through winning protections from sympathetic governments or negotiating concessions from benevolent employers. It means establishing worker cooperatives that give them ownership of enterprises, participatory budgeting systems that give them control of public resources, strong unions that give them collective bargaining power, community organizations that give them political influence, and democratic planning mechanisms that give them economic decision-making authority. It means creating durable structures of worker power that persist regardless of which politicians hold office or what policies they implement. Trusting workers means implementing their demands regardless of capitalist opposition because worker needs are legitimate and capitalist opposition is self-interested defense of exploitation. It means passing legislation that workers want even when businesses threaten to leave, establishing programs that workers need even when corporations warn of economic consequences, building systems that workers demand even when capitalists claim they are impossible or dangerous. It means recognizing that capitalist opposition confirms you are threatening their power rather than indicating you are making mistakes. Trusting workers means ultimately transforming the system to serve them rather than merely regulating the existing system to limit its worst abuses. It means replacing capitalist ownership with worker ownership, market allocation with democratic planning, profit motivation with solidarity, competition with cooperation, and hierarchy with equality. It means building an entirely different economic system organized around worker needs and democratic control rather than around capitalist profit and market power.